I was spreading marmalade on my toast when my daughter Jessica slammed her coffee mug down so hard the ceramic cracked. "Mom, we need to talk about your finances," she announced, her voice sharp enough to cut glass. My son Marcus nodded from across the kitchen island, his arms crossed like he was bracing for battle. "We've been discussing it, and honestly, we think you're being irresponsible with money. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you." I looked up from my breakfast, confusion clouding my thoughts. "Irresponsible? What are you talking about?" Jessica rolled her eyes dramatically. "The cruise last month, the new furniture, those painting classes. You're spending our inheritance like it's water." The word, "our," hit me like a physical blow. I set my knife down carefully, my hands beginning to tremble. Marcus leaned forward, his expression cold. "We're adults now, Mom. We don't need you hovering over us anymore. But we do need you to be smart about the money Dad left behind." I stared at my children, these two people I'd raised from babies, nursed through fevers, celebrated every milestone with. "Your inheritance?" I whispered. "That's what this is about?" Jessica's laugh was bitter and cruel. "Mom, let's be real. You're 72. How much longer are you really gonna need all that money? We have mortgages, kids to put through college, real responsibilities." My heart began pounding so hard I could hear it in my ears. "Real responsibilities," I repeated slowly. "My name is Hortense Reed, but everyone who loves me calls me Horty. At least, they used to. I'm sitting here now, 3 weeks after that devastating breakfast, wondering if anyone truly loves me at all. For 72 years, I've been someone's daughter, someone's wife, someone's mother. I've never just been Horty. Maybe it's time I learned how." The morning that changed everything started like any other Tuesday, in my Millbrook Heights kitchen. I'd woken early, as I always do, and prepared breakfast for Jessica and Marcus, who'd been staying with me for the past month while Jessica's house was being renovated after a kitchen fire. I thought having them here was a blessing. Family time we'd missed when they were busy with their own lives. I should have known better. I'd been humming an old Ella Fitzgerald tune while setting out the good china, the Wedgwood pattern my late husband Theodore had bought me for our 20th anniversary. The morning light streamed through the bay windows, illuminating the fresh daffodils I'd arranged the night before. Everything felt perfect, peaceful. I had no idea I was about to have my heart ripped from my chest by the two people I loved most in this world. Jessica emerged first, her designer heels clicking against the hardwood floors like a countdown to disaster. At 45, she carried herself with the sharp efficiency of someone who'd climbed the corporate ladder in pharmaceutical sales. Her blonde hair was pulled back in a severe bun, and her makeup was already flawless despite the early hour. She barely glanced at the breakfast I'd prepared, instead heading straight for the coffee machine like it was life support. "Morning, sweetheart." I called softly, arranging bacon on her plate the way she'd liked it as a child, crispy but not burnt. She didn't respond, just stared at her phone screen with that perpetual frown she'd developed somewhere between her divorce and her promotion to regional manager. Marcus appeared next, 43 years old and still treating my house like a hotel he couldn't be bothered to appreciate. He was my baby, the one who'd clung to my leg on his first day of kindergarten, sobbing that he didn't want to leave me. Now he couldn't seem to get far enough away. He worked in finance, something involving investment portfolios that I'd never quite understood, despite his condescending attempts to explain it to me over the years. "Good morning, my loves," I said again, settling into my chair with my own modest portion. I'd learned long ago to eat less when they were around. Jessica had made enough comments about my weight over the years that I'd developed the habit of picking at my food when she was watching. That's when Jessica delivered her opening blow about my finances, and the world I'd carefully constructed around my children began to crumble. The conversation that followed was like watching a building demolition in slow motion. Every word they spoke knocked down another wall of the life I thought we'd built together. "Mom, you have to understand our position," Marcus said, his tone the same one he probably used with difficult clients. "Dad's life insurance was substantial. The house is paid off. Your Social Security and pension are more than enough for someone your age to live comfortably. Someone my age." As if 72 meant I was already dead, just taking up space and resources that rightfully belonged to them. "Comfortably doesn't mean extravagantly," Jessica added, scrolling through her phone as if this conversation about my life was just another item on her to-do list. I looked around my kitchen, this room where I'd made thousands of meals for my family, where I'd kissed scraped knees and helped with homework, where Theodore and I had shared quiet coffee moments in the early morning light. "This is my home," I said softly. "The money Theodore left was for me to live my life." "But what kind of life, Mom?" Jessica's voice rose impatiently. "You don't need to be gallivanting around on cruise ships and redecorating every 6 months. You're not 25 anymore." The cruelty in her voice took my breath away. When had my daughter become this person? When had my joy become her inconvenience? "I've been saving and planning for 60 years, I said, my voice barely above a whisper. "I think I've earned the right to enjoy some of it." Marcus leaned back in his chair, and I caught a glimpse of the little boy who used to build pillow forts in this very room. But his eyes were cold now, calculating. "Have you thought about what happens if you get sick? If you need care? You could blow through everything, and then what?" "We'd have to foot the bill." "You'd have to foot the bill," I repeated, tasting the bitterness of those words. "Is that what I am to you now? A bill?" "Don't be dramatic," Jessica snapped, finally looking up from her phone. "We're trying to have an adult conversation about your future. Our future. This affects all of us." Adult conversation. As if I'd been speaking in baby talk for the past 72 years. As if raising them, sacrificing for them, loving them unconditionally hadn't been adult enough. "I see," I said quietly, though I was beginning to see far more than they realized. "We think you should consider moving somewhere smaller," Marcus continued, oblivious to the storm brewing inside me. "A nice senior community. Sell this house, put the money in investments, live off the interest, be responsible." Responsible. The word echoed in my head like a curse. I'd been responsible my entire life. Responsible for Theodore's happiness. Responsible for raising children who apparently saw me as nothing more than a bank account with an expiration date. When had I ever been allowed to be irresponsible? When had I ever put my own wants first? "And what if I don't want to move?" I asked, surprised by the steadiness in my own voice. Jessica laughed, a sound devoid of warmth or humor. "Mom, you're being ridiculous. This house is way too big for one person. You rattle around in here like a ghost." "It's not healthy." A ghost. That's what I'd become to them. A specter haunting their inheritance, using up resources they'd already mentally allocated for themselves. I thought of all the times I'd chosen the generic cereal instead of the name brand, so they could have new school clothes. I thought of the second-hand car I'd driven for 15 years, while they got new bicycles, new computers, college tuition paid in full. "Besides," Marcus added, cutting his bacon with surgical precision, "you don't even need most of these rooms anymore. What do you do with 4 bedrooms? Why do you need a formal dining?"
Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time. So if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now, back to the story.
"Room when you eat alone most nights anyway?" "Eat alone most nights." The casual cruelty of it struck me like a slap. Yes, I ate alone most nights, because my children were too busy with their own lives to visit, too important to call, too successful to remember that I existed unless they needed something. "I like my space," I said, though my voice sounded small even to my own ears. "I like having room for when you visit, for when the grandchildren come." "The grandchildren are in college now, Mom," Jessica said with exaggerated patience. "Emma's a sophomore at Northwestern, and Tyler's graduating this spring. They're not going to be coming for sleepovers anymore." Emma and Tyler. My precious grandchildren who used to beg to spend weekends with me, who'd helped me bake cookies and plant flowers in the garden. Now they were strangers who sent obligatory birthday cards and perhaps a rushed phone call on holidays. When had I lost them too? "We're just thinking about your best interests," Marcus said, but his eyes were already calculating square footage and property values. "A smaller place, maybe one of those active senior communities with activities and people your own age. You'd be happier." people my own age. As if happiness could be sorted by birth year. As if I'd automatically find kindred spirits among strangers simply because we'd survived the same number of decades. And you'd be richer, I said quietly. The silence that followed was deafening. Jessica's fork clinked against her plate as she set it down. Marcus cleared his throat uncomfortably. Neither of them denied it. This isn't about money, Jessica finally said, but her voice lacked conviction. This is about what's practical. What makes sense? For who? I asked, and this time my voice was stronger. What makes sense for who, Jessica? For everyone. Marcus jumped in quickly. For you, for us, for the future. Mom, you're not thinking clearly about this. Not thinking clearly? At 72, apparently my mind was as much their property as my bank account. I think I'm thinking more clearly than I have in years, I said, standing up from the table. Where are you going? Jessica demanded. We're not finished talking about this. I paused at the kitchen doorway, looking back at these two people who'd once been the center of my universe. Jessica was already back to scrolling through her phone, and Marcus was checking his watch like he had somewhere more important to be. Yes, I said softly, we are. I walked upstairs to my bedroom, my legs feeling unsteady beneath me. I sat on the edge of the bed Theodore and I had shared for 37 years before cancer took him, and I let the weight of the morning crash over me. They wanted me to disappear. Not die, exactly. But fade away quietly into some sterile community where I wouldn't be an inconvenience, where I wouldn't spend money they considered theirs. I thought about the cruise I'd taken last month, my first vacation in 5 years. I'd stood on the deck watching dolphins play in the ship's wake and felt alive for the first time since Theodore's funeral. I'd made friends with a woman named Ruth from Portland who collected vintage postcards and taught me to play bridge. For 10 days, I hadn't been anyone's mother or grandmother or widow. I'd just been Horty, a woman enjoying the sunset. Apparently that was unacceptable. I thought about the painting classes they'd mocked. Every Tuesday afternoon I drove to the community center and lost myself in watercolors, trying to capture the way light fell across the park pond, or the particular shade of purple in my garden irises. I wasn't good at it, but I was getting better, and more importantly, it made me happy. When had my happiness become such an inconvenience? The new furniture they'd criticized was the first I'd bought in 20 years. Theodore had been a practical man who believed in using things until they fell apart. The sofa in the living room had been reupholstered twice and was still uncomfortable. After he died, I'd finally bought a reading chair that didn't hurt my back, a small writing desk for the letters I'd been meaning to write to, old friends, a bookshelf for the novels I was finally allowing myself to read. Such extravagance, apparently. I heard their voices floating up from the kitchen, discussing me like I was a problem to be solved, rather than their mother. Their words were muffled, but their tone was clear. Annoyance. Impatience. The burden of dealing with a difficult elderly parent who didn't understand her place in their carefully ordered world. I walked to my dresser and opened the top drawer, pushing aside handkerchiefs and jewelry boxes until I found what I was looking for. Theodore's business card from his law firm, yellowed with age but still legible. He'd been proud of that firm, proud of the work they did. After he died, his partners had assured me that if I ever needed legal help, I should call them. I'd never taken them up on that offer. Until now. I picked up the phone and dialed the number, my fingers surprisingly steady. Whitmore, Daniels and Associates. A pleasant voice answered. Hello, I said, my voice growing stronger with each word. This is Hortense Reed, Theodore Reed's widow. I need to speak with someone about updating my will. Of course, Mrs. Reed. Would Thursday afternoon work for you? Thursday would be perfect, I said, and for the first time in hours I smiled. Thank you. I hung up the phone and sat there for a moment, listening to my children's voices downstairs. They were making plans for my life, deciding my future without consulting me. They saw me as an inconvenience, a responsibility, a bank account that was inconveniently attached to a person who insisted on living her own life. They wanted me to disappear. They wanted me to become invisible, to fade into the background of their important lives. They wanted me to hand over everything Theodore and I had worked for, and be grateful for whatever scraps they threw my way. They had no idea what they'd just unleashed. I stood up, smoothed my skirt, and walked back downstairs. Jessica and Marcus were still in the kitchen, their heads bent together over Marcus's laptop, probably looking at real estate listings for senior communities. They didn't look up when I entered. "I'm going out," I announced. "Where?" Jessica asked absently, not bothering to lift her eyes from the screen. "To run some errands," I said calmly. "I'll be back this afternoon." "Okay," Marcus said, equally distracted. "We'll probably be gone when you get back. I have to get to the office. And Jess has that meeting with the contractors." Of course they did. They dropped their bombshell on my life, and now they were moving on to more important things. I was just another item checked off their to-do list. I gathered my purse and car keys, my steps lighter than they'd been all morning. As I reached the front door, I heard Jessica's voice from the kitchen. "I think that went well." She seemed to understand. Understand, yes, I understood perfectly. I understood that my children saw me as an obstacle to overcome, a problem to solve, a resource to manage. I understood that the love I'd given them unconditionally for over 40 years meant nothing if it came between them and their inheritance. But what they didn't understand was that I was done being their convenient, invisible mother. I was done shrinking myself to fit their expectations. I was done apologizing for taking up space in my own life. As I drove toward downtown Millbrook Heights, I thought about the conversation we'd just had. Every word replayed in my mind, each casual cruelty cutting deeper than the last. But alongside the hurt, something else was growing. Something I hadn't felt in years. Power. For the first time since Theodore died, I held all the cards. They wanted my money? They'd have to earn it. They wanted me to disappear? I'd show them what disappearing really meant. I pulled into the parking lot of Whitmore, Daniels & Associates, and sat in my car for a moment, gathering my thoughts. Through the windshield, I could see people going about their daily lives, unaware that mine was about to change completely. I thought about Emma and Tyler, my grandchildren who barely knew me anymore. I thought about the charities I'd always wanted to support but hadn't, because I was saving every penny for the children who saw me as nothing more than a burden. I thought about the life I'd put on hold for 72 years, waiting for permission to live it. I wasn't waiting anymore. I walked into the law office with my head held high, and when the receptionist greeted me with genuine warmth, I realized it had been months since anyone had looked at me like I mattered. "Mrs. Reed," she said with a smile, "Mr. Daniels is ready to see you." James Daniels had been Theodore's junior partner 30 years ago, and now he was senior partner, a distinguished man in his 60s with kind eyes and a firm handshake. "Horty," he said warmly, "it's so good to see you. How are you holding up?" "I'm doing well, James," I said, and I realized with surprise that it was true. Despite the morning's devastation, despite the betrayal that was still fresh and raw, I was doing well. Better than I'd done in years. "What can I help you with today?" he asked, settling behind his desk. I took a deep breath, thinking of Jessica's cold eyes and Marcus's calculating expression. I thought of their casual dismissal of my happiness, their entitled attitude toward money I'd earned through decades of sacrifice. I thought of the grandchildren they'd kept from me, the life they wanted me to abandon, the future they'd planned without consulting me. "I want to change my will," I said clearly. "I want to change everything." James raised an eyebrow but nodded professionally. "Of course. What kind of changes are you thinking about?" I smiled, and I knew it wasn't a particularly nice smile, the kind that will teach my children exactly how much they need me after all. For the next 2 hours, James and I went through every detail of my estate. The house worth $800,000. The investment accounts Theodore had carefully built over decades. The life insurance money I'd barely touched. The savings account that had grown steadily since his death. The jewelry, the furniture, the cars, the small cabin upstate that held 40 years of family memories, all of it currently destined for Jessica and Marcus, who'd made it clear they saw it as theirs already. "Are you sure about this, Horty?" James asked gently when we'd finished outlining the changes. "It's quite a dramatic shift." I thought about the breakfast conversation, about the cold dismissal of my happiness, about the casual cruelty of people who saw me as nothing more than an inconvenience. "I've never been more sure of anything in my life," I said. As I drove home, I felt something I hadn't experienced in years: freedom. For the first time since Theodore's death, I was making decisions based on what I wanted, not what was expected of me. For the first time in my adult life, I was putting myself first. My phone buzzed with a text from Jessica. "Gone to meet contractors. Back tomorrow to continue our conversation. Thanks for being so understanding about everything." Understanding. I laughed out loud in my empty car. Yes, I understood everything now. I understood that love without respect was worthless. I understood that sacrifice without appreciation was meaningless. I understood that I'd spent 72 years being who everyone else needed me to be, and I had maybe 10 or 15 good years left to discover who I actually was. I wasn't going to waste them. When I got home, the house felt different. It still looked the same, with Jessica's designer handbag on the counter and Marcus's coffee mug in the sink, but the energy had shifted. This wasn't their temporary lodging anymore. This wasn't the bank account they were managing. This was my home, my life, my choice. I walked through each room slowly, seeing it with new eyes. The living room, where I'd read bedtime stories. The kitchen, where I'd packed thousands of school lunches. The backyard, where I'd taught them to ride bicycles and planted their first garden. Every corner held memories of the love I'd poured into raising them. And now they wanted me to pack it all up and move to a senior community so they could inherit it faster. I sat down at my writing desk, the one they'd criticized as an unnecessary expense, and pulled out a sheet of my good stationery. I had some letters to write, phone calls to make, plans to put in motion. Jessica and Marcus thought they'd settled my future that morning. They thought they'd convinced their inconvenient mother to step aside gracefully and stop being such a burden on their important lives. They had no idea that the woman they'd dismissed as a dramatic old lady was about to become the most interesting problem they'd ever encountered. I picked up my pen and began to write, and for the first time in years, my handwriting was steady and sure. The game was about to change, and this time I was the one making the rules. The next morning, I woke before dawn with a clarity I hadn't felt in decades. The house was silent, Jessica and Marcus still asleep in their respective rooms, unaware that the ground had shifted beneath their feet. I made my coffee in the pre-dawn darkness, savoring the ritual that had become mine alone since Theodore's passing. The kitchen felt different now, charged with possibility rather than weighed down by expectation. I'd spent the previous evening making phone calls and sending emails, setting wheels in motion that would soon gather unstoppable momentum. The first call had been to my financial advisor, Robert Chen, who'd managed our investments for 15 years with steady, conservative growth. "Mrs. Reed," he'd said with genuine warmth, "what can I do for you today?" "Robert, I need you to prepare a complete portfolio analysis," I'd told him. "Everything. Every account. Every investment. Every asset. I want exact values as of yesterday's close." There had been a pause. "Of course. May I ask what this is regarding?" "Estate planning," I'd said simply, which was true enough. "I'll need it by Friday." The second call had been to Margaret Holloway, my insurance agent. Theodore's life insurance had been substantial, nearly $2 million that I'd invested conservatively and barely touched. "Margaret, I need to understand all my options regarding my policy benefits. What flexibility do I have?" The third call had been the most satisfying. Emma's college number was still in my phone from when she'd called me freshman year, homesick and overwhelmed. She was a sophomore now, studying art history at Northwestern, though I'd learned that not from her but from Jessica's casual mention months ago. "Grandma Horty?" Emma's voice had been surprised but pleased. "Oh my gosh, hi. I was just thinking about you." "Were you, sweetheart?" I'd asked, my heart clenching with love and loss. "Yeah, I'm taking this amazing course on Renaissance art, and I kept thinking about those museum trips we used to take when I was little." Remember when you taught me about perspective by showing me how the people in the background of paintings got smaller? I'd remembered everything. Every museum visit, every art book we'd pored over together, every afternoon spent drawing in my kitchen while Jessica worked late. I remember, darling. Tell me about your studies. We'd talked for an hour about her classes, her professors, her dreams of working in a museum someday, about how expensive textbooks were, how she was working 2 part-time jobs to help with expenses, how she worried about student loans, about how she missed our talks, missed having time to visit, missed the way things used to be when she was younger. I keep meaning to call more, she'd said wistfully, but Mom says you're busy with your own life now, that we shouldn't bother you too much. The knife had twisted in my chest. Jessica had been gatekeeping my relationship with my own granddaughter, making Emma feel like she was an imposition. Sweetheart, I'd said carefully, you could never bother me. Not ever. I would love to hear from you anytime, about anything. Really? The hope in her voice had been heartbreaking. Really. In fact, I have an idea. What if I came to visit you next weekend? We could go to the Art Institute, catch up properly. You'd come here, to Chicago? I'd love to. It's been too long since I've seen you. Tyler had been next. My grandson, the serious one, studying engineering at Purdue. He'd been more reserved on the phone, but I detected the same underlying loneliness. The same sense that he'd been cut off from family connections he'd once treasured. Grandpa Ted always said I had the mind for engineering. He'd told me during our conversation. I wish I could talk to him about my projects. He would be so proud of you, I'd said. What kind of projects are you working on? An hour later, I'd learned about sustainable energy systems, about Tyler's internship applications, about his dreams of designing buildings that could generate their own power, about how he'd been turned down for several competitive programs because he couldn't afford to work unpaid internships, about how he'd been considering taking out additional loans just to survive. My grandchildren were struggling, and I'd known nothing about it. They'd been told not to burden me, while Jessica and Marcus plotted how to access the very money that could ease their paths. The irony was bitter and perfect. Now in the morning quiet, I reviewed the notes I'd made during those calls. Emma's art history program had opportunities for study abroad, but the costs were prohibitive. Tyler's engineering department had a research program he was desperate to join, but it required a summer without income. Both of them were working jobs that interfered with their studies, stressed about money while their parents calculated my assets like vultures circling carrion. I heard movement upstairs as Jessica's alarm went off. Soon they'd be down here, probably ready to continue yesterday's conversation about my irresponsible lifestyle and their mature concerns about my future. I smiled into my coffee cup. Let them come. I was ready. Jessica appeared first. As always, her heels clicking against the hardwood with military precision. She looked surprised to see me already dressed and alert. "You're up early," she said, pouring coffee into the travel mug she kept in my cabinet. "I've always been an early riser," I replied mildly. "Sleep becomes less necessary when you get older." She glanced at me sharply, probably trying to determine if that was a reference to yesterday's conversation about my age. I kept my expression neutral, innocent even. Let her wonder. Marcus emerged looking harried, checking his phone with the frantic energy of someone who lived his life in 15-minute increments. "Morning, Mom," he said absently, grabbing a piece of toast and eating it standing up. "Sit down," I said firmly. "Both of you. I want to talk." They exchanged glances, probably expecting capitulation. Jessica settled into her chair with the satisfied air of someone who'd won an argument. Marcus sat more reluctantly, clearly anxious to get to his office. "I've been thinking about our conversation yesterday," I began, my voice calm and measured, "about responsibility and maturity, and what makes sense for the future." "Good," Jessica said, pulling out her phone. "I found several communities that would be perfect for you. The Willows has a wonderful reputation, and Sunset Manor has those activities you enjoy." Activities I enjoyed. As if they knew what I enjoyed. As if they'd paid attention to my interests for longer than it took to calculate their cost. "That's thoughtful of you," I said, but I've made other arrangements. Marcus looked up from his phone. Other arrangements? I've been reflecting on what you said about being adults, about not needing me anymore. And you're absolutely right. They both stared at me, clearly not expecting agreement. You are adults, I continued. You've made that very clear. You have your own lives, your own responsibilities, your own priorities. You've outgrown any need for a mother's involvement in your affairs. Well, Jessica said carefully, that's not exactly what we meant. Isn't it? I tilted my head, genuinely curious. Yesterday, you told me you're adults who don't need me hovering. You made it clear that my choices about my own life are inconvenient for you. You spent the last few years visiting only when you need something, calling only on holidays, treating me like an obligation rather than a relationship. Mom, Marcus started, but I held up a hand. Let me finish. You've taught me something valuable. You've shown me that my role as your mother is complete. You don't need my guidance, my support, my involvement in your lives. You've made it clear that my primary value to you is financial, and that you'd prefer I minimize my impact on your inheritance by living as small and quiet a life as possible. The silence that followed was electric with tension. Jessica's coffee mug hovered halfway to her lips, forgotten. Marcus had stopped chewing his toast entirely, so I've decided to take your advice. I continued, my voice growing stronger. I'm going to stop acting like a mother to two adults who don't want or need mothering. I'm going to start living like the independent woman you seem to think I should be. What does that mean? Jessica asked, her voice tight. It means I'm going to live my life exactly as I choose, without consulting you, or considering your opinions about my choices. It means I'm going to spend my money however I want, travel wherever I want, make whatever changes to my life that please me. I smiled, and I knew it wasn't entirely pleasant. After all, as you've reminded me, it's my money until I die. Marcus set down his toast carefully. Mom, you're misunderstanding what we were saying. Am I? Because what I heard was two adults telling me they don't need me, that my happiness is less important than their inheritance, and that I should arrange my remaining years around your convenience. I stood up, my movements deliberate and controlled. So that's exactly what I'm going to stop doing. Where are you going? Jessica demanded as I moved toward the kitchen door. To live my life, I said simply. The one you think I should stop wasting. I left them sitting at my kitchen table, their breakfast growing cold as they processed what had just happened. I could hear their urgent whispers as I climbed the stairs, but I didn't pause to listen. Let them scheme and plan and worry. Let them wonder what I meant, what I was planning, what I might do next. I had a busy day ahead of me. My first stop was the bank, where I met with Patricia Mills, the branch manager who'd handled our accounts for over a decade. Patricia was a sharp woman in her 50s who'd always treated me with respect, even after Theodore's death when some people started viewing me as a widow who needed managing, rather than a client who deserved service. Mrs. Reed, she said warmly, how nice to see you. What can I help you with today? I need to make some changes to my accounts, I said, settling into the chair across from her desk. Several changes, actually. For the next hour, we restructured my financial life. I moved money from joint accounts that Jessica had access to into new accounts in my name only. I updated beneficiaries on investment accounts, removing the automatic transfers that would have gone to my children, and setting up new designations that would surprise them considerably. Are you sure about these changes? Patricia asked diplomatically. Some of them are quite significant. I've never been more certain of anything, I replied. My children have made it clear they're adults who don't need my involvement in their lives. I'm simply respecting their independence. Of course, Patricia said, though I caught her glancing at my signature with concern. Let her worry. By the time anyone questioned my mental competence, it would be far too late. My next stop was the jewelry store downtown, a family-owned shop where Theodore had bought my engagement ring 45 years ago. The current owner, David Steinberg, was the son of the man who'd originally served us, and he greeted me with the courtesy of someone who'd known our family for decades. Mrs. Reed, he said warmly, what brings you in today? I need an appraisal, I said, opening my purse and removing a small velvet box. For insurance purposes. Inside the box was my grandmother's diamond brooch, a stunning piece from the 1920s that had been handed down through 3 generations of women in my family. It was worth a small fortune, though I'd never had it properly appraised. I'd always planned to give it to Jessica someday, when she was mature enough to appreciate its history and significance. That day, I now realized, would never come. "This is extraordinary," David said, examining the brooch under his jeweler's loupe. "The craftsmanship is exquisite, and these diamonds are exceptional quality." "Where did you say this came from?" "My grandmother," I replied. "It's been in the family for nearly a century." "Well, it's museum quality. The insurance value would be substantial." He looked up at me seriously. "Are you considering selling it?" "I'm considering my options," I said carefully. "What would those be?" 2 hours later, I left the jewelry store with a formal appraisal that made my head spin. The brooch alone was worth more than Jessica made in a year. Combined with my grandmother's other pieces, the jewelry I'd inherited but never worn represented a significant fortune that my children didn't even know existed. They'd assumed they knew the extent of my assets. They'd calculated their inheritance based on the obvious things: the house, the investment accounts, the life insurance money. They had no idea about the art collection Theodore had quietly assembled, or the antique furniture that had been in my family for generations, or the jewelry that had passed from mother to daughter for nearly a century. They'd seen me as a simple widow with modest assets to be managed for their benefit. They were about to learn how thoroughly they'd underestimated both my resources and my resolve. My phone buzzed as I drove to my next appointment. A text from Marcus. "Mom, we need to talk. Can we have dinner tonight? I think there was a misunderstanding this morning." A misunderstanding? I almost laughed out loud. There had been no misunderstanding. For the first time in years, I understood the situation perfectly. I ignored the text and continued to my appointment with Catherine Morris, the director of the Millbrook Heights Community Foundation. Catherine was a dynamic woman in her 40s who transformed the foundation from a sleepy charitable organization into a powerhouse that funded everything from literacy programs to senior services to college scholarships. "Mrs. Reed," she said with genuine pleasure, "Theodore always spoke so highly of your work together. How can I help you today?" Theodore and I had made modest donations to the foundation over the years, but nothing that would have attracted significant attention. Today was going to be different. "I'm interested in establishing a scholarship fund," I said without preamble. "A substantial one." Catherine's eyebrows rose slightly. "How wonderful. What kind of scholarship were you thinking about?" "I want to support students studying art history and engineering," I said, thinking of Emma and Tyler's passionate descriptions of their fields. Students who show promise but lack the financial resources to pursue competitive programs. "That's a beautiful way to make a difference," Catherine said warmly. "What kind of funding level were you considering?" I named a figure that made her pen stop moving across her notepad. "I'm sorry," she said carefully. "Could you repeat that?" I repeated the number, watching her eyes widen. It represented a significant portion of my liquid assets, money that Jessica and Marcus had already mentally allocated to their own futures. "Mrs. Reed," Catherine said slowly, "that's an extraordinary gift. It would fund dozens of scholarships annually. Are you certain about this commitment?" "Completely certain," I replied. "My late husband always believed that education was the greatest gift we could give to young people. I want to honor that belief." For the next 2 hours, we discussed the details. The scholarship would be awarded annually to students who demonstrated both academic excellence and financial need. Recipients would be selected by a committee that included faculty from local universities and successful professionals in their fields. The fund would be managed by the foundation, with strict oversight to ensure the money was used exactly as I intended. "We'll need to verify your assets, of course," Catherine explained, "and there will be legal documentation to finalize the establishment of the fund." "Of course," I agreed. "I've already spoken with my attorney about this. James Daniels at Whitmore Daniels & Associates will be handling the legal aspects." "Excellent," Catherine said. "This is truly exciting, Mrs. Reed. Your generosity is going to change so many lives." "My generosity?" The word echoed in my mind as I drove home. When had I last been called generous? When had anyone acknowledged that the money Jessica and Marcus wanted to control had come from a lifetime of work and sacrifice? When had they last thanked me for anything beyond producing them and raising them and setting aside my own dreams for theirs? The answer was simple. Never. My phone buzzed again. This time it was Jessica. "Mom, Marcus told me about this morning. I think we need to clear the air. Can we talk when you get home?" Clear the air. As if the problem was poor communication rather than fundamental disrespect. As if I'd misunderstood their casual dismissal of my autonomy and their entitled attitude toward my assets. I was getting tired of being underestimated. When I arrived home, both cars were in the driveway. Apparently, they'd canceled their important meetings to deal with their problematic mother. I parked in the garage and entered through the kitchen, where I found them waiting with expressions of forced concern. "Mom!" Jessica began immediately. "I think we got off on the wrong foot this morning." "Did we?" I asked mildly, hanging my purse on its usual hook. "You seemed upset," Marcus added, "and that wasn't our intention at all." "What was your intention?" I asked, genuinely curious. They exchanged glances, clearly having planned this conversation. "We're worried about you," Jessica said carefully. "You've seemed different lately. More isolated. More impulsive with your spending. We're concerned that you might be making decisions that aren't in your best interest." "Decisions that aren't in my best interest," I repeated slowly. "Like taking a cruise? Like buying furniture? Like enrolling in art classes? Like spending money without thinking about the future," Marcus said bluntly. "Mom, you're 72. You need to be conservative with your resources." "Conservative for whom?" I asked. "For yourself," Jessica said quickly. "What if you get sick? What if you need long-term care? What if there's an emergency? What if I want to live my life while I still can?" I countered. "What if I want to enjoy the money Theodore and I worked for instead of hoarding it like a dragon guarding treasure?" "That's not what we're saying," Marcus protested. But his tone suggested it was exactly what he was saying. "Then what are you saying?" I challenged. "Because what I heard yesterday was that my spending bothers you. My lifestyle choices are irresponsible, and I should move somewhere smaller so you can inherit this house sooner rather than later." "That's not..." Jessica started, but I cut her off. "Yes, it is. And you know what? You're right about one thing. I am 72 years old. I've spent decades putting everyone else's needs before my own. I've saved and sacrificed and worried about the future until I forgot to live in the present." I looked at each of them in turn. "That stops now." "What does that mean?" Marcus asked, though his voice suggested he was afraid to know. "It means I'm going to spend my remaining years doing exactly what makes me happy, without seeking your approval or considering your convenience." I smiled, and this time I didn't try to make it pleasant. "It means you're about to learn what it's like to have a mother who puts herself first for a change." The silence that followed was heavy with unspoken threats and barely contained panic. I could see them processing the implications, calculating how much damage an irresponsible mother could do to their carefully planned inheritance. "Mom," Jessica said finally, her voice carefully controlled, "we love you. We want what's best for you." "Do you?" I asked softly, "because what would be best for me is having children who visit because they enjoy my company, not because they want something. What would be best for me is being treated like a person instead of a bank account. What would be best for me is having my choices respected instead of criticized." Neither of them responded to that, because there was no response that wouldn't damn them. "I'm going upstairs," I announced. "I have some phone calls to make." "What kind of phone calls?" Marcus asked sharply. I paused at the kitchen doorway and looked back at him. "The kind that adults make about their own affairs," I said sweetly. "You wouldn't want me to hover, would you?" I left them in the kitchen and climbed the stairs to my bedroom, closing the door firmly behind me. Through the walls I could hear their urgent whispers, their voices rising and falling in heated discussion. Let them talk. Let them worry. Let them wonder what their independent, irresponsible mother might do next. I had more calls to make. More plans to set in motion. I had 72 years of people-pleasing to undo, and perhaps 10 or 15 years left to discover who I really was when I wasn't busy being who everyone else needed me to be. The afternoons stretched ahead of me, full of possibilities that had nothing to do with anyone's expectations but my own. I picked up my phone and dialed Emma's number again. Time to plan that trip to Chicago, and perhaps to start building relationships that were based on love rather than obligation. For the first time in years, I had all the time in the world. The confrontation came 3 days later, on a Friday evening when the autumn light slanted through my dining room windows like golden honey. I was arranging fresh chrysanthemums in my grandmother's crystal vase when Jessica's car pulled into the driveway with an urgency that made the gravel spray. Through the window, I watched her march toward my front door with Marcus trailing behind her, his face pale and tense. I didn't hurry to answer the doorbell. Let them wait. Let them wonder if I was home, if I was ignoring them, if I was even the same woman they thought they could manipulate with guilt and obligation. When I finally opened the door, Jessica pushed past me without invitation, her designer heels clicking against my hardwood floors like accusations. "We need to talk," she announced, her voice sharp enough to cut glass. "Right now." Marcus followed more hesitantly, looking around my living room as if seeing it for the first time. Perhaps he was. Perhaps he'd never really noticed the antique secretary desk where I paid my bills, or the oil painting above the fireplace that had belonged to my great-aunt, or the Persian rug that had been a wedding gift from Theodore's parents. All things that had value beyond their ability to calculate. "Please, sit down," I said graciously, settling into my favorite armchair. "Would you like coffee? Tea?" "We don't want refreshments," Jessica snapped, remaining standing in the center of the room like a prosecutor preparing to deliver a closing argument. "We want to know what the hell you think you're doing." "Language, Jessica," I said mildly. "This is still my home." "Is it?" she shot back. "Because apparently you've been making changes that affect all of us without bothering to discuss them with anyone." I tilted my head, genuinely puzzled. "Changes that affect you? I'm not sure what you mean." Marcus pulled a folded paper from his jacket pocket, his hand shaking slightly. "We got a call from the bank," he said quietly. Apparently there was some concern about unusual account activity. Large transfers, closed accounts, new beneficiary designations. "The bank called you about my accounts?" I asked, though I kept my voice level. How interesting. I wasn't aware that I'd given them permission to discuss my private financial matters with anyone else. Jessica's face flushed red. "I'm on some of those accounts, Mother. I have been for years in case of emergencies." "Were you?" I asked with feigned surprise. "Well, not anymore. I've simplified my banking arrangements considerably. Much more appropriate for someone my age, don't you think?" The silence that followed was electric with fury and barely controlled panic. I could see Jessica's mind racing, calculating exactly what those changes might mean for their carefully planned future. "Mom," Marcus said carefully, clearly trying to be the reasonable one, "these kinds of major financial decisions shouldn't be made impulsively. You should have consulted with us, or at least with your financial advisor." "Should I have?" I asked innocently. "But you told me just days ago that you're adults who don't need me anymore. Why would adults need to be consulted about another adult's financial decisions?" "Because those decisions affect our family," Jessica said through gritted teeth. "Do they?" I leaned forward slightly, my voice taking on an edge that surprised even me. "Because I was under the impression that you'd graduated from being my family to being my critics. I thought your relationship with me was now primarily financial, focused on ensuring I don't spend your inheritance too frivolously." "That's not what we said," Marcus protested, but his voice lacked conviction. "Isn't it? Let me see if I remember correctly. You're adults now. You don't need me hovering. I should stop spending money on things you consider unnecessary. I should move somewhere smaller so you can inherit this house. I should live more conservatively to preserve your financial future." I smiled, and I knew it wasn't kind. Did I miss anything? Neither of them answered, because there was nothing to say that wouldn't confirm exactly what I'd understood. "The thing is," I continued, my voice growing stronger, "I realized you were absolutely right. You are adults. You don't need a mother managing your expectations about inheritance. You don't need me to preserve assets for your benefit. You don't need me at all, except as a source of money you feel entitled to receive." "Mom, please," Marcus started, but I held up a hand. "So I've taken your advice. I'm living like the independent woman you seem to think I should be. I'm making my own decisions about my own money without consulting people who've made it clear they see me as an inconvenience." Jessica's composure finally cracked. "What have you done?" she demanded, her voice rising to something close to a shriek. "What have you done with the money?" "My money," I corrected gently. "And I've done exactly what I wanted to do with it. Some I've invested differently. Some I've donated to causes I care about. Some I've set aside for people who actually appreciate what they receive." "Donated?" Marcus's voice came out as a strangled whisper. "How much did you donate?" "Enough to make a real difference in people's lives," I replied. "The kind of difference that money should make when it's used thoughtfully rather than hoarded selfishly." Jessica began pacing around my living room like a caged animal, her hands gesturing wildly. "You can't do this to us. We have responsibilities, obligations. We're counting on that money for our children's futures, for our retirements, for emergencies. Are you?" I asked with genuine interest. "How curious, because I don't recall you asking me about any of those plans. I don't remember being consulted about your financial strategies or your children's education costs. I wasn't aware that you'd built your entire future around money that belongs to someone else." "It's family money," Marcus said desperately. "Dad worked his whole life building that nest egg for all of us." "No," I said firmly, my voice cutting through his protests like a blade. "Theodore worked his whole life building security for me. For his wife. He trusted me to use good judgment about what happened to it after I was gone. He never intended for you to treat it as an early inheritance that I was merely stewarding until my inconvenient death." The word, death, hung in the air between us, heavy with implications they weren't quite ready to voice but were certainly thinking. I could see it in their faces, the calculation of actuarial tables, the impatience with an elderly woman who was taking too long to die and leave them her assets. "Besides," I continued conversationally, "you told me you don't need me anymore. Presumably, that includes not needing my money either. After all, you're successful adults with your own careers and resources. Surely you're not depending on your elderly mother to fund your lifestyles." "That's not the point," Jessica said, but her voice had lost its earlier fury and taken on something closer to panic. "Then what is the point?" I asked, "because I'm having trouble following your logic. You want me to live smaller, spend less, and minimize my impact on assets you consider yours, but you also want me to preserve those assets for your benefit. You want me to stop being a mother to adult children who don't need mothering, but you also want me to consult with you about my personal decisions. You want independence from my involvement in your lives, but you want control over my involvement in my own life." Neither of them had an answer for that, because there was no answer that didn't reveal the fundamental selfishness of their position. "I think you should leave now," I said quietly, standing from my chair with the dignity of someone who'd finally found her backbone. "You've made your feelings about our relationship quite clear, and I've adjusted my behavior accordingly. I'm sure you have important adult lives to return to." "Mom, wait," Marcus said, reaching toward me with something like desperation. "We can work this out. We can talk about this rationally." "Rationally?" I laughed, and the sound surprised me with its bitterness. "Marcus, there's nothing rational about expecting your mother to live her life according to your financial convenience. There's nothing rational about treating someone's autonomy as a threat to your inheritance." "We're not trying to control you," Jessica protested, though even she seemed to know how hollow that sounded. "Aren't you? Then why are you here, demanding explanations for my financial decisions? Why are you angry that I've chosen to donate my own money to causes I believe in? Why does my independence threaten you so much?" They stood there in my living room, these two people I'd loved and raised and sacrificed for, and I saw them clearly for perhaps the first time in years. They weren't my children anymore, if they ever really had been. They were strangers who happened to share my DNA, people who saw me as an obstacle to overcome rather than a person to love. Get out, I said finally, my voice quiet but implacable. Both of you, now. Mom, Marcus tried again, but I shook my head. No. You wanted to be adults who don't need me? Congratulations. You've succeeded. Now go be adults somewhere else. Jessica's face contorted with rage and something that might have been fear. You'll regret this, she hissed. You'll regret cutting us out, pushing us away. When you're old and sick and alone, don't come crying to us. Old and sick and alone. I repeated thoughtfully. You mean like I am now? Like I've been since your father died while you've been too busy with your important lives to visit? Like I was last month when I had that fall and spent 6 hours in the emergency room by myself because I didn't want to bother you? Marcus's face went pale. You fell? When? Why didn't you call us? Because you told me not to hover, I said simply. Because you made it clear that my problems were inconveniences for your busy schedules. Because I learned not to need you long before you decided you didn't need me. They left then, finally, Jessica slamming my front door hard enough to rattle the windows. I stood in my quiet living room for a long moment, listening to their cars start and drive away with angry spins of gravel. Then I walked to my kitchen and made myself a cup of tea, my hands steady despite everything that had just happened. My phone rang while I was sitting at my kitchen table, watching the sun set through my garden windows. Emma's name appeared on the screen, and I felt something tight in my chest begin to loosen. Grandma Horty? Emma's voice was bright with excitement. I just wanted to thank you again for the amazing weekend in Chicago. I've been telling everyone about the Monet exhibition, and my art history professor wants to know if you'd be interested in giving a guest lecture about experiencing art across different decades. Would I? I laughed, surprised by the invitation. That sounds wonderful, sweetheart. And Tyler called me after you visited him at Purdue. He said you were like a different person, so interested in his projects and full of energy. He said it was like getting his real grandmother back. His real grandmother? The words hit me with unexpected force. What did he mean by that? Emma was quiet for a moment. Well, Mom always told us you were kind of fragile after Grandpa died. That we shouldn't bother you too much. That you needed space to grieve. But you're not fragile at all, are you? You're amazing. Fragile? Jessica had been telling my grandchildren I was fragile. Too delicate to handle regular contact with them. Too weak to be involved in their lives. She'd isolated me from them as effectively as if she'd built a wall between us, all while positioning herself as the protective daughter managing her mother's emotional needs. I'm not fragile, I said firmly. I never was. I know that now, Emma said. Tyler and I have been talking about it. We want to see you more, spend real time with you. We've missed so much. Yes, I agreed, my throat tight with emotion. We have. After I hung up, I sat in my kitchen as darkness fell around me, thinking about the conversation with my children and the phone call with my granddaughter. The contrast was stark and painful. Emma and Tyler saw me as someone worth knowing, worth spending time with, worth learning from. Jessica and Marcus saw me as a financial resource to be managed and eventually inherited. The difference told me everything I needed to know about the choices I'd made. The doorbell rang again around 9 o'clock, and I was surprised to see James Daniels standing on my front porch, his usually immaculate appearance slightly disheveled. James, I said, opening the door wider. What brings you here so late? I got some interesting phone calls this afternoon, he said, stepping into my foyer. From your daughter and your son, both demanding to know what changes you've made to your will and threatening legal action if I don't provide them with details. Did they? I wasn't entirely surprised, but the speed of their response was impressive. Horty, I need to ask you directly, are you making these changes under any kind of duress? Has anyone pressured you or threatened you in any way? I laughed, the sound echoing through my hallway. James, I'm making these changes because I'm finally free from duress. For the first time in years, I'm making decisions based on what I want, rather than what other people expect from me. He studied my face carefully, his lawyer's instincts clearly evaluating my mental state and emotional stability. Your children seem to believe you're not thinking clearly. They mentioned concerns about your judgment, your emotional state, your ability to make rational financial decisions. Of course they did, I said dryly. It's much easier to question my competence than to acknowledge their sense of entitlement. Are you competent, Horty? He asked gently. Because if there are any doubts, we need to address them before we finalize these changes. I looked at this man who'd known me for decades, who'd handled my legal affairs through marriage and widowhood, who'd seen me make countless decisions about property and investments and family matters. James, do I seem incompetent to you? No, he said immediately. You seem more focused and determined than I've seen you in years. But I had to ask. I understand. And I appreciate your concern. But I want you to know that I've never been more certain about anything in my life. These changes reflect exactly what I want to happen with my estate. He nodded slowly. Then we'll proceed as planned. But Horty, you should know that your children aren't going to accept this quietly. They're talking about challenging the will, claiming diminished capacity, arguing that you've been unduly influenced. By whom? I asked with genuine curiosity. I've made these decisions entirely on my own. That's what I told them. But they seem convinced that someone must have manipulated you into making choices that go against your family's interests. Their interests? I corrected. These changes go against their interests. They align perfectly with my family's interests, if you include my grandchildren and the causes I care about. James smiled for the first time since he'd arrived. That's exactly the kind of clarity that will make their legal challenges very difficult to sustain. After he left, I walked through my house, turning off lights and checking locks, performing the quiet rituals of someone who lived alone and had learned to find comfort in solitude. But as I climbed the stairs to my bedroom, I didn't feel alone. I felt free. The next morning brought another confrontation. This one more painful than anything Jessica and Marcus had managed. My sister Claire arrived unannounced, her face set in the expression of grim determination that had gotten her through 40 years of teaching high school English. Hortense Reed, she said, pushing past me into my living room with the authority of someone exactly 18 months older than me who'd never let me forget it. What in God's name do you think you're doing? Good morning to you too, Claire, I said mildly. Coffee? Don't you dare try to deflect this with social pleasantries, she snapped, settling onto my sofa like a judge taking the bench. Jessica called me last night, crying. Crying, Horty. She's convinced you've lost your mind. Has she? I asked, settling into my chair with my own cup of coffee. How dramatic of her. She says you've given away huge amounts of money to strangers, that you've cut them out of your will, that you're acting completely irrationally. She says a lot of things, I replied. Not all of them are true. Claire leaned forward, her voice taking on the tone she'd once used to discipline rowdy teenagers. Horty, these are your children, your own flesh and blood. Whatever they've done to upset you, surely it can't justify punishing them this way. Punishing them? I set down my coffee cup carefully. Claire, how is it punishment for adults to be responsible for their own financial security? Because they're counting on that inheritance. They've made plans, commitments, decisions based on what they expected to receive. Exactly, I said. They've treated my money as if it already belonged to them, without ever considering that I might have my own plans for it. Claire was quiet for a moment, clearly struggling with something. Horty, she said finally, I know Theodore's death was hard on you. I know you've been lonely, maybe a little depressed. Sometimes when we're grieving, we make choices that don't reflect our true feelings. My true feelings, I repeated. Tell me, Claire, when did you last ask me about my true feelings? When did Jessica or Marcus? When did anyone in this family consider what I might actually want instead of what would be most convenient for everyone else? That's not fair, Claire protested. We all care about you. Do you? Because caring about someone usually involves spending time with them, talking to them, including them in your life. When did you last invite me to dinner, Claire? When did you last call just to chat? When did you last treat me like a sister instead of an obligation? The silence that followed was answer enough. Jessica and Marcus have made it very clear that they see me as a financial resource rather than a person, I continued. They want me to live smaller, spend less, and preserve their inheritance. They've told me I'm irresponsible for enjoying my own money, dramatic for wanting to be included in their lives, and inconvenient for taking up space in my own home. They didn't mean it that way, Claire said weakly. Didn't they? Then how did they mean it when they told me I should move to a senior community so they could inherit this house? How did they mean it when they criticized every purchase I've made since Theodore died? How did they mean it when they said they're adults who don't need me anymore? Claire had no answer for that because there was no way to reinterpret such clear statements. I've spent my entire adult life putting other people's needs ahead of my own, I said quietly. I put Theodore's career ahead of my education. I put my children's futures ahead of my present. I put everyone else's comfort ahead of my happiness. I'm 72 years old, Claire. How much longer am I supposed to wait for permission to live my own life? My sister looked around my living room, perhaps seeing it clearly for the first time. The beautiful furniture I'd finally allowed myself to buy. The art on the walls that reflected my taste rather than someone else's. The flowers I'd arranged because they made me happy, not because I was expecting company. Maybe, she said slowly, they could have been more tactful about their concerns. Tactful? I laughed, and it wasn't entirely pleasant. Claire, they told me I was wasting their inheritance on unnecessary luxuries. They suggested I was too old to enjoy my own money. They made it clear that my happiness was less important than their financial security. What part of that could have been made tactful? She was quiet for a long time, processing what I'd said. Finally, she looked up at me with something that might have been understanding. What do you want, Horty? What would make you happy? It was the first time in months that anyone had asked me what I wanted, and the question caught me off guard. I want to be treated like a person instead of a bank account, I said finally. I want relationships based on love rather than obligation. I want to spend my remaining years doing things that matter to me instead of preserving assets for people who've made it clear they can't wait for me to die. And if they apologize, if they change how they treat you, I considered that, thinking about the conversation in my kitchen, about Jessica's fury and Marcus's panic, about their immediate assumption that I'd lost my mind rather than found my backbone. Apologies are just words, Claire. I'm interested in actions now. In choices that demonstrate actual respect and affection rather than just damage control. After Claire left, looking more thoughtful than she had when she'd arrived, I sat in my garden with a glass of wine and watched the late afternoon light slant across my flower beds. The chrysanthemums were blooming in brilliant oranges and yellows, and the maple tree Theodore had planted 20 years ago was turning the deep red that had always been my favorite color. This was my home. My garden. My life. And for the first time in years, I was living it exactly as I chose, without apology and without permission. My phone buzzed with a text from Tyler. Grandma, Emma told me about the scholarship fund you're setting up. That's incredible. Could we talk about it sometime? I have some ideas about how to identify students who really need the help. I smiled, feeling something warm unfold in my chest. At least someone in my family understood that money was meant to be used for good, not hoarded for convenience. I texted back. I would love to hear your ideas. How about dinner this weekend? The response came immediately. Yes, can't wait to see you again. 3 words that my own children hadn't said to me in years. 3 words that told me everything I needed to know about where my love and my legacy belonged. The autumn evening was cooling around me, but I felt warmer than I had in months. I was finally living like the woman I'd always been beneath the mother, the wife, the careful steward of other people's expectations. I was finally living like Horty. The winter that followed was the most peaceful I'd experienced in years. Snow blanketed my garden in pristine white, transforming the familiar landscape into something magical and new. I watched it through my kitchen window each morning while I drank my coffee, no longer listening for the sound of critical voices or calculating footsteps on my hardwood floors. Jessica and Marcus had been conspicuously absent since our final confrontation in October. No phone calls on Thanksgiving, no visits during the holidays, No acknowledgement of my existence beyond the legal papers their attorney had served me in November. They were challenging my will, claiming diminished capacity and undue influence, exactly as James had predicted they would. The irony wasn't lost on me that they'd finally proven my point perfectly. Their response to losing control over my money was to try to have me declared incompetent, demonstrating with crystal clarity that they'd never seen me as anything more than a resource to be managed. The legal challenge itself was the strongest possible validation of every choice I'd made. James had been confident from the beginning that their case was weak. Horty, he'd told me during one of our meetings, "You've been making complex financial decisions independently for 3 years since Theodore's death. You've managed investments, handled property taxes, navigated insurance claims, and maintained your household entirely on your own. No judge is going to believe you suddenly lost capacity the moment you made decisions your children didn't like." The court-ordered psychological evaluation had been almost amusing. Dr. Patricia Hernandez was a pleasant woman in her 50s who'd spent 2 hours with me, administering cognitive tests and asking detailed questions about my life, my relationships, and my decision-making process. "Mrs. Reed," she'd said at the end of our session, "I want you to know that in 20 years of practice, I've rarely encountered someone with such clear reasoning and emotional insight. Your children's attorney is going to be very disappointed with my report." She'd been right. Dr. Hernandez's evaluation had been unequivocal. I was not only competent but demonstrated above-average cognitive function for my age group, excellent judgment, and what she termed healthy self-advocacy skills that suggest strong emotional resilience. The financial advisor Jessica and Marcus had hired to review my decisions had been equally disappointing to their cause. Robert Shen, my own advisor, had provided detailed documentation showing that my asset allocation was actually more conservative and better diversified after my changes than it had been before. The charitable donations, while substantial, represented a reasonable percentage of my total worth and were structured in ways that provided significant tax advantages. Mrs. Reed's financial planning demonstrates sophisticated understanding of estate management, the independent advisor had concluded in his report. These are not the decisions of someone with diminished capacity, but rather of someone with clear goals and the knowledge to achieve them. By February, their legal challenge had collapsed entirely. James had called me on a snowy Tuesday morning with the news that their attorney was withdrawing the case rather than face the inevitable dismissal that would come with court costs assessed against his clients. "It's over, Horty," he'd said, and I could hear the satisfaction in his voice. "They can't challenge your competence anymore. The will stands exactly as you wrote it." I'd felt a deep sense of vindication, but also something that surprised me: sadness. Not regret for my choices, but grief for the relationship that could have existed if my children had been capable of loving me for who I was, rather than what I could provide for them. The strangest part of that winter was discovering who I was when I wasn't trying to please anyone else. I read books that interested me rather than ones I thought I should read. I took a pottery class at the community center and learned that my hands, stiff with arthritis though they were, could still create beautiful things. I joined a book club where intelligent women my age discussed literature and politics and art with the kind of passionate engagement I'd forgotten was possible. I traveled too. Short trips at first, weekend visits to museums in nearby cities, but then longer journeys to places I'd always wanted to see. I spent a week in Santa Fe, wandering through galleries and learning about Native American pottery, the techniques. I took a cruise through the Panama Canal, something Theodore had always dismissed as unnecessarily expensive, and found myself enchanted by the engineering marvel and the history lesson it provided. Each trip, each new experience, each choice I made for my own enjoyment rather than someone else's approval, added another layer to the person I was becoming. Or perhaps the person I'd always been, buried under decades of other people's expectations. Emma and Tyler became regular fixtures in my life in ways that astonished me. Emma called every Sunday evening, just to talk. Not because she needed anything, not because it was a duty, but because she genuinely enjoyed our conversations. She told me about her professors, her friends, her hopes for graduate school. She asked my advice about boys and classes and career decisions, treating my opinions as valuable rather than outdated. Tyler visited once a month, driving down from Purdue with a cooler full of his latest culinary experiments. He'd discovered cooking his sophomore year and had become surprisingly skilled at it. We'd spend Saturday afternoons in my kitchen, him teaching me techniques he'd learned from YouTube videos while I shared stories about his grandfather and the family history he'd never heard. Mom never told us about Grandpa's business. He said one afternoon while we were making homemade pasta. I had no idea he'd started that company from nothing, that he'd put himself through law school working nights. Your mother has her own version of family history, I'd replied carefully. She prefers to focus on different aspects of our story. She told us he inherited money, that the family had always been comfortable, Tyler continued, his hands working the pasta dough with steady concentration. She made it sound like everything came easy. I'd been quiet for a moment, thinking about Theodore's calloused hands from his early years in construction, about the nights he'd stayed up studying while working full-time, about the sacrifices he'd made to build security for our family. Nothing came easy, I'd said finally, but your grandfather believed that each generation should have more opportunities than the last. He would have been proud of what you're accomplishing. I wish I could have known him better, Tyler had said softly. I wish I could have asked him about business, about making decisions, about how to build something that lasts. You can still ask me, I'd offered. I was there for all of it. I remember the stories he would have told you. That conversation had led to regular Sunday morning calls where Tyler asked me about everything from investment strategies to family recipes to relationship advice. He was dating a young woman named Sarah, whom he was clearly smitten with, and he wanted to know how Theodore had known I was the one. He said I made him want to be better than he was. I'd told him. Not different, but better. More generous, more thoughtful, more ambitious. He said love should make you grow, not shrink. Sarah makes me want to be better, Tyler had said thoughtfully. She makes me want to work harder, think deeper, care more about things that matter. Then she sounds perfect for you, I'd said, and I'd meant it. The scholarship fund had launched in January, with its first awards going to 6 students, 3 in art history and 3 in engineering. Catherine Morris had arranged for me to meet the recipients at a small ceremony at the Community Foundation, and I'd been deeply moved by their stories. Maria Santos was a first-generation college student studying art history with dreams of becoming a museum curator. Her parents had immigrated from El Salvador and worked multiple jobs to support her education, but the costs of the specialized programs she needed were beyond their reach. Mrs. Reed, she'd said, tears in her eyes, this scholarship means I can accept the internship at the Metropolitan Museum this summer. It's what I've dreamed of since I was a little girl. David Kim was an engineering student whose father had been injured in a workplace accident, leaving the family struggling with medical bills and lost income. The scholarship would allow him to continue his studies in sustainable energy systems without taking on crippling debt. I want to design buildings that heal the environment instead of harming it, he'd told me. Your generosity is making that possible. Each of the 6 students had similar stories of talent and determination constrained by financial limitations. As I listened to them talk about their dreams and their gratitude, I felt a satisfaction deeper than anything I'd experienced in years. This was what money was for. Not to be hoarded against imaginary future needs, but to be used to make real differences in real lives. The local newspaper had run a story about the scholarship fund, including a photograph of me with the 6 recipients. Local widow establishes scholarship program. The headline had read, and the article had detailed my gift to the Community Foundation and my reasons for creating the fund. Mrs. Reed believes that education is the greatest gift we can give to young people, the article had quoted me as saying. These students represent our future, and investing in their success is investing in all of our futures. I'd received dozens of letters and phone calls after the article appeared, from other community members who wanted to contribute to the fund, from educators who wanted to nominate deserving students, from young people who shared their own educational dreams and financial struggles. The scholarship fund had become something larger than I'd initially envisioned, a catalyst for community supportive education that would continue long after I was gone. Spring arrived early that year, with daffodils blooming in March and the maple trees budding before April. I was in my garden, planting the tomato seedlings I'd started on my kitchen windowsill, when a car I didn't recognize pulled into my driveway. The woman who emerged was about Jessica's age, with graying brown hair and kind eyes behind wire-rimmed glasses. She approached my garden gate hesitantly, as if unsure of her welcome. "Mrs. Reed?" she called softly. "I'm sorry to bother you. I'm Linda Morrison. I'm David Kim's mother." David was one of the scholarship recipients, the engineering student whose father had been injured. I set down my trowel and walked to the gate, wiping my hands on my gardening apron. "Please, call me Horty," I said, opening the gate to invite her in. "How is David? How are his studies going?" "That's why I'm here," Linda said, her voice thick with emotion. "I wanted to thank you in person for what you've done for him. For our whole family." She told me about David's progress, about the internship he'd secured with a renewable energy company, about the research project he was working on that might lead to graduate school funding. But more than that, she told me about the confidence the scholarship had given him, the sense that someone believed in his potential. "He was ready to drop out," she said quietly. "The financial pressure was too much, and he felt guilty about the burden his education was placing on our family. Your scholarship didn't just pay for his classes, Mrs. Reed. It saved his future." We sat in my garden for over an hour, talking about David's dreams and the challenges facing families trying to provide educational opportunities for their children. Linda was a teacher herself, working in an inner-city school where many of her students had the intelligence and drive to succeed, but lacked the resources to pursue higher education. "What you've done with this scholarship," she said as she prepared to leave, "it's going to ripple outward in ways you can't imagine. David wants to use his education to help other young people from families like ours. Your generosity is creating a cycle of giving that will last for generations." After she left, I sat in my garden as the afternoon light faded, thinking about ripples and generations and the different ways we leave our mark on the world. Jessica and Marcus had seen my money as their inheritance, something to be preserved for their benefit. But money sitting in bank accounts helped no one. Money invested in people, in dreams, in the future, that was what created lasting value. My phone rang as I was heading inside to prepare dinner. Emma's name appeared on the screen, and I answered with the pleasure I always felt at hearing from her. "Grandma," she said, and I could hear excitement bubbling in her voice. "I have the most amazing news. I got accepted to the graduate program at Yale for art history. Full funding, research assistantship, everything." "Emma," I exclaimed, my heart swelling with pride. "That's wonderful. Tell me everything." She'd applied to only 3 graduate programs, all highly competitive, all offering the kind of advanced study that would prepare her for the museum career she'd dreamed of since childhood. Yale had been her first choice, but she'd been realistic about her chances. "Dr. Williams says they were particularly impressed by my undergraduate research project," she said. "The one about how art reflects social change during economic upheaval. I never would have been able to do that research without the time I had because I wasn't working 3 jobs to pay for school." "You earned this," I told her firmly. "Your intelligence, your hard work, your passion for your subject. That's what got you accepted." "But you made it possible," she said softly. "The way you've supported me this year, the confidence you've given me that my dreams matter, the time you've spent really listening to what I care about. Mom and Dad always made me feel like art history was a frivolous waste of time, something that wouldn't lead to a real career. You've shown me that following my passion isn't selfish, it's essential." After our call ended, I sat in my kitchen feeling a deep sense of completion. Emma was going to have the kind of educational opportunities I'd never been able to pursue, the chance to study what she loved without compromise or apology. Tyler was thriving in his engineering program, confident in his abilities and his future. 6 young strangers were pursuing their dreams because of the scholarship fund. All of this had been possible because I'd finally chosen to use my resources in ways that aligned with my values rather than other people's expectations. The legal settlement from Jessica and Marcus's failed challenge had come with an unexpected bonus. Their attorney had included a clause requiring them to pay my legal costs, which James had presented to them with what I imagined was considerable satisfaction. The amount wasn't huge, but it was symbolic. The final acknowledgement that their attempt to control me had not only failed, but had cost them money they couldn't afford to lose. James had delivered the check with a smile. "I thought you might want to add this to the scholarship fund," he'd suggested. "Perfect," I'd agreed. Let their greed fund someone else's dreams. Summer brought another surprise. I was in my kitchen, preparing lunch after a morning in the garden, when I heard a car in my driveway. Through the window, I saw Tyler's familiar Honda, but there was a young woman with him I didn't recognize. Sarah, I realized with a flutter of excitement. He'd finally brought her to meet me. They came to the back door, Tyler looking nervous in the way young men do when introducing someone important to family. Sarah was lovely, with dark hair and intelligent eyes and a warm smile that reached those eyes genuinely. "Grandma," Tyler said, his arm around Sarah's waist. "I'd like you to meet Sarah Chen. Sarah, this is my grandmother, the one I've told you so much about." "Mrs. Reed," Sarah said, extending her hand with old-fashioned courtesy. "Tyler talks about you constantly. I feel like I know you already." "Please call me Horty," I said, taking her hand and finding it firm and warm. "And you must call me by my first name if Tyler's going to keep bringing you around." We spent the afternoon on my back porch, talking about everything and nothing. Sarah was studying environmental science, with plans to work in conservation policy. She and Tyler had met in a sustainability course and bonded over their shared belief that their generation had a responsibility to repair the environmental damage of previous decades. "Tyler told me about your scholarship fund," Sarah said as we watched him attempt to fix my garden sprinkler system. "What an incredible thing to do. I keep thinking about how many young people you're going to help over the years." "It's selfish, really," I said with a smile. "It makes me happier than anything I've ever done with money." Tyler said his mother was upset about it, Sarah said carefully, clearly trying to navigate family complexities she didn't fully understand. "His mother has her own priorities," I replied diplomatically. "She's entitled to her opinions, just as I'm entitled to my choices." Sarah nodded thoughtfully. "Tyler said she wanted you to save the money for family. But isn't this family too? Investing in young people's futures, creating opportunities for the next generation, that seems like the most family-oriented thing you could do." Her insight surprised me with its maturity. This young woman, barely 21 years old, understood something about family and legacy that my own children had never grasped. "Yes," I said quietly. "That's exactly what it is." That evening, Tyler and Sarah helped me prepare dinner, the three of us working together in my kitchen with an ease that felt natural and right. Sarah asked thoughtful questions about my life, my marriage to Theodore, my experiences raising children in a different era. Tyler shared stories about his grandfather that I'd told him, keeping Theodore's memory alive for someone who'd never had the chance to meet him. As we sat around my dining room table, eating the meal we'd prepared together, I felt a profound sense of contentment. This was what family was supposed to feel like. Not obligation or duty or financial calculation, but genuine affection and mutual respect, and shared joy in each other's company. "Tyler," Sarah said as we were clearing the dishes, "your grandmother is exactly what you said she was. Strong and wise and funny and completely inspiring." "She is," Tyler agreed, kissing my cheek as he carried plates to the kitchen. "She's the best person I know." After they left, I sat in my living room as evening settled around me, thinking about the day and the young couple who'd filled my house with laughter and warmth. Tyler was clearly planning to propose to Sarah soon. I could see it in the way he looked at her, in the careful attention he paid to how she and I got along. He wanted my approval, my blessing, my acceptance of the woman he loved. He had all three, completely and without reservation. Sarah was going to be a wonderful addition to our family, someone who understood what mattered and why. My phone buzzed with a text message, interrupting my reflections. The number wasn't one I recognized, but the message was clear. "This is Jessica. We need to talk." I stared at the message for a long time, considering my options. I could ignore it, delete it, pretend I'd never seen it. I could respond with anger or coldness, or the kind of cutting dismissal she'd taught me to expect from family conversations. Or I could be curious about what had prompted this contact after months of silence. I typed back, About what? The response came quickly. Can I come over? Please? Please. A word I couldn't remember Jessica using with me in years. Against my better judgment, I found myself curious about what might have prompted this uncharacteristic humility. Tomorrow afternoon, I typed. 2:00. She arrived exactly on time, which surprised me. Jessica was usually fashionably late to everything, a habit that had always struck me as a small cruelty, disguised as sophistication. She stood on my front porch looking uncertain, older somehow, wearing jeans and a simple sweater instead of her usual professional armor. "Thank you for seeing me," she said when I opened the door. I led her to the living room and offered coffee, which she declined. We sat in chairs facing each other, the same positions we'd occupied during our last confrontation. But the energy between us was completely different. "I owe you an apology," Jessica said without preamble. "A huge one. I've been thinking about everything that happened, everything I said, and I was wrong. About all of it." I didn't respond immediately, waiting to see if this was genuine remorse or another attempt at manipulation. "I got your Christmas card," she continued. "The one with the picture of you and Emma and Tyler at the museum. They looked so happy. You looked so happy. And I realized that I hadn't seen you look that happy in years." "I am happy," I said simply. "I know. And I also know that I'm the reason you weren't happy before." Her voice was quiet, almost defeated. "I've been a terrible daughter, Mom, selfish and entitled and completely blind to how I was treating you." "What changed your mind?" I asked, not unkindly but with genuine curiosity. Jessica was quiet for a moment, gathering her thoughts. "A lot of things," she said finally. "The legal case falling apart made me realize how wrong I was about your mental state. You weren't confused or manipulated. You were finally standing up for yourself. And then Emma called me last month." "Did she?" "She told me about her graduate school acceptance, about how excited she was, about how you'd supported her dreams when everyone else told her they were impractical." Jessica's voice cracked slightly. "She said you were the only adult in her life who'd ever treated her interests as valid instead of frivolous." "Her interests are valid," I said. "She's brilliant and passionate and going to do important work in the world. I know that now, but I didn't support her the way I should have. I was so focused on practical concerns, on financial security, on making sure she chose a career that would provide stability, that I never stopped to consider what would make her happy." She was crying now, quiet tears that she wiped away with the back of her hand. "Tyler told me the same thing. He said you're the only family member who asks him about his projects, who understands what he's trying to accomplish, who believes in what he's doing." "I do believe in what he's doing," I said. "He's going to change the world. And I've been so busy worrying about money and inheritance and security that I've missed watching my children become amazing adults. I've missed the chance to know them as people instead of just responsibilities." We sat in silence for several minutes, the weight of lost years and missed opportunities settling between us. "I don't expect forgiveness," Jessica said finally. "I don't have any right to ask for it. But I wanted you to know that I understand now what I did, what I lost, what I threw away because I was too selfish to see what mattered." "What do you want from this conversation?" I asked gently. "Nothing," she said, and I believed her. "I just wanted you to know that you were right to change your will, right to cut us out, right to protect yourself from people who were treating you badly, even if those people were your own children." "Jessica," I said carefully, "I didn't change my will to punish you. I changed it to reflect my values and my priorities, to make sure my resources went to people and causes that would use them well. I know, and they will. The scholarship fund, Emma and Tyler's education, the charities you support. You're making a real difference in the world. That's what Dad would have wanted, isn't it? For the money to do good, instead of just sitting there making people comfortable." Yes, I thought, that was exactly what Theodore would have wanted. "I should go," Jessica said, standing from her chair. "I just wanted you to know that I understand now and I'm sorry. For everything." I walked her to the door, this woman who'd been my baby, my little girl, my source of both greatest joy and deepest pain. "Jessica," I said as she reached the threshold, "understanding is the first step toward change. She looked back at me with something that might have been hope. Is it too late for change? I thought about that question for a long time after she left. Was it too late? Could relationships damaged by years of disrespect and entitlement be repaired? Could trust be rebuilt after such fundamental betrayal? I didn't know the answer, but I found myself willing to discover it. The scholarship fund announcement for the second year brought applications from over 200 students, far more than we could support with the current endowment. Catherine Morris and I met on a crisp October morning to discuss expanding the program. The response has been extraordinary, she told me, spreading application files across her conference table. We have students from 12 different colleges and universities applying, all with exceptional academic records and compelling financial need. How many can we support this year? I asked. With the current fund level, 8 students. But Horty, I've had calls from other community members who want to contribute after seeing the impact of last year's awards. If we opened it up to additional donors, we could potentially double or triple the number of scholarships. The idea of expanding the program filled me with excitement. What would that involve? Essentially, we'd establish it as a permanent community fund, with you as the founding donor, but with opportunities for others to contribute annually. Your initial gift would remain the foundation, but we could build on it significantly. Within 6 months, the Hortense and Theodore Reed Scholarship Fund had grown to include donations from over 50 community members and local businesses. The annual scholarship dinner had become a major community event, bringing together students, donors, educators, and families to celebrate educational achievement and support. At the second annual dinner, I sat at the head table watching Maria Santos give the keynote address. She was now a graduate student at Columbia, working toward her PhD in art history, and she'd just secured a prestigious fellowship that would allow her to spend a year studying Renaissance art in Italy. Mrs. Reed's scholarship didn't just pay for my education, Maria told the audience of nearly 300 people. It taught me that someone believed my dreams were worth investing in. That lesson has shaped everything I've done since, every goal I've set, every challenge I've faced. When someone invests in you that way, you have a responsibility to pass it forward. After her speech, Maria came to our table, radiant with confidence and purpose. Mrs. Reed, she said, embracing me warmly, I wanted you to know that I've started a mentorship program for first-generation college students interested in museum careers. 6 students so far, and growing every semester. That's wonderful, I said, my heart full of pride. It's what you taught me, she replied. That we have a responsibility to use our opportunities to create opportunities for others. The evening was full of such moments. David Kim, now in his senior year of engineering, had designed a solar panel system for his family's home that had reduced their electricity bills by 80%. He was planning to start a company focused on making renewable energy affordable for low-income families. Each of the students had taken their education and used it not just for personal advancement, but for community improvement. They'd understood, as Jessica and Marcus never had, that privilege carries responsibility, that gifts are meant to be shared, that the true measure of success is how much good you do for others. As the evening wound down, I found myself surrounded by young people whose lives had been changed by the scholarship fund, by their families who thanked me with tears in their eyes, by community members who told me how proud they were to be part of this program. Mrs. Reed, one of the new scholarship recipients, a young woman named Angela studying environmental engineering, approached me with her parents. I wanted you to meet my mom and dad. They wanted to thank you for making my dreams possible. Angela's mother, a woman about Jessica's age who worked as a hospital custodian, took my hands in hers. Mrs. Reed, she said in accented English, Angela is the first in our family to go to college. Because of you, she will be an engineer. Because of you, everything changes for our family. That night, driving home through the quiet streets of Millbrook Heights, I thought about legacy and family and the different ways we leave our mark on the world. Jessica and Marcus had seen my money as their inheritance, something to be preserved for their personal benefit. But true inheritance wasn't about money sitting in bank accounts. It was about values passed forward, opportunities created, dreams made possible. The scholarship fund would continue long after I was gone, supporting students whose names I'd never know, creating ripples of positive change that would spread far beyond anything I could imagine. Emma and Tyler would graduate without debt, free to pursue careers they loved rather than jobs they needed for financial survival. Young people like Maria and David and Angela would use their education to solve problems and create opportunities for the next generation. That was the kind of legacy worth building. That was the kind of inheritance that truly mattered. As I pulled into my driveway, I saw a car I didn't recognize parked on the street. A figure detached itself from the shadows near my front porch, and I tensed until I recognized Marcus walking toward my car. "Mom," he said as I got out, his voice tentative. "I know it's late. I was waiting for you to get home." "Marcus," I said, surprised but not alarmed. His posture was different from the last time I'd seen him, less aggressive, more uncertain. "I heard about the scholarship dinner," he said. "I drove by and saw all the cars, all the people. I read about it in the newspaper too. What you've built, what you're doing. It's incredible." We stood in my driveway for a moment, two people who'd once been everything to each other and had somehow become strangers. "I was wrong," he said simply, "about everything. The way I treated you, the things I said, the way I tried to control your decisions. I was selfish and greedy and completely blind to what you were trying to accomplish." "What changed your mind?" I asked, the same question I'd posed to Jessica months earlier. "Tyler," he said with a rueful smile. "My son had to teach me what I should have known all along. He told me about your relationship with him and Emma, about how you've supported their dreams, about how you've made them feel valued and understood in ways I never did." "Tyler is a remarkable young man," I said carefully. "He is. And he's remarkable because of you, not despite me. You've given him confidence and purpose and a sense of what family really means. You've done for him what I should have been doing." Marcus looked older than his 43 years, worn down by stress and regret. "I've been thinking about Dad a lot lately," he said. "About the values he tried to teach us, about what he would think of how I've behaved. He would be ashamed of me, wouldn't he?" I thought about Theodore, about his gentle strength and his unshakable belief in doing what was right, even when it was difficult. "Your father believed that people could change," I said finally. "He believed that recognizing our mistakes was the first step toward becoming better." "Is it too late for me to become better?" Marcus asked, echoing his sister's question from months before. "It's never too late," I said, and I meant it. "But change has to come from genuine understanding, not just regret about consequences." "I do understand," he said earnestly. "I understand that I treated you like a bank account instead of a person. I understand that I was more concerned about my inheritance than your happiness. I understand that I failed as a son in every way that matters." We talked for over an hour, standing in my driveway under the autumn stars. Marcus told me about his struggles at work, about the financial pressures that had made him so focused on my money, about the way his obsession with security had poisoned his relationships with everyone he cared about. "Sarah asked me something last week that I can't stop thinking about," he said. "She asked me what I'd accomplished in my life that I was proud of, what I'd done that made the world better. And I couldn't answer her, Mom. I couldn't think of a single thing." "You raised Tyler," I said. "He's proud of you, despite everything. That's something. But even that, I haven't been the father he deserved. I've been so busy worrying about providing financial security that I forgot to provide emotional support. I've been so focused on the future that I've missed the present." As he prepared to leave, Marcus turned back to me with something that looked like hope. "Would you be willing to have dinner with me sometime? Just to talk, not about money or inheritance or any of that. Just to get to know each other again?" "I'd like that," I said, and I realized I meant it. The winter holidays approached with a warmth I hadn't felt in years. Emma and Tyler both came home for Thanksgiving. Not to their parents' houses, but to mine. Sarah joined us, officially part of the family now since Tyler had proposed during their fall break trip to Chicago. She said yes. Tyler had called to tell me the morning after the proposal. And she said she can't wait to have you as a grandmother-in-law. I prefer just grandmother, I'd told him, laughing through happy tears. We spent Thanksgiving afternoon cooking together in my kitchen, 4 generations of recipes coming together in dishes that bridged past and future. Emma made my grandmother's cornbread stuffing. Tyler prepared Theodore's favorite sweet potato casserole. Sarah contributed a cranberry sauce recipe from her own family tradition. As we sat around my dining room table, I looked at these 3 young people who'd chosen to build their holiday around, including me, and I felt a gratitude so deep it took my breath away. Grandma, Emma said, raising her glass of wine, I want to propose a toast to the woman who taught us that family isn't about obligation or duty or financial arrangements. It's about love and support and believing in each other's dreams. To Grandma Horty, Tyler added, who showed us that it's never too late to stand up for yourself, never too late to change direction, never too late to choose love over fear. To the strongest, wisest, most generous woman I know, Sarah concluded, who welcomed me into this family with open arms and an open heart. We drank to that, and then we talked and laughed until late into the evening, sharing stories and dreams and plans for the future. It was the kind of Thanksgiving I'd always imagined having, but had never quite achieved, relaxed and joyful and full of genuine affection. The next morning, as I was cleaning up the last of the dishes, my doorbell rang. I found Jessica and Marcus standing on my front porch, looking uncertain but determined. We know you're probably busy, Jessica said, and we don't want to intrude on your time with the kids, but we brought something we thought you might want to see. Marcus held out a large wrapped package, something flat and rectangular. It's not much, he said, but we wanted you to know that we've been thinking about what really matters. I invited them in and unwrapped the package carefully. Inside was a framed photograph I'd never seen before, obviously taken from a distance at the recent scholarship dinner. It showed me at the head table, surrounded by students and their families, my face bright with joy and pride. Tyler took this? Jessica said softly. He said it was the happiest he'd ever seen you look, and he wanted us to see it too. To understand what you'd built, what you'd accomplished. We had it professionally printed and framed, Marcus added. We thought you might like to have it. I stared at the photograph, remembering that evening, the sense of purpose and fulfillment I'd felt surrounded by young people whose lives had been changed by education and opportunity. It's beautiful, I said. Thank you. We stood there for a moment, the 3 of us, in the foyer where so many difficult conversations had taken place. But this felt different. Tentative, perhaps, but genuine in a way that gave me hope. Would you like some coffee? I asked. I made extra this morning. They accepted, and we moved to the kitchen where Emma and Tyler had left evidence of their breakfast preparations scattered across the counter. Jessica automatically began loading the dishwasher, a gesture so familiar from her childhood that it brought unexpected tears to my eyes. The house feels different, Marcus observed, looking around the kitchen with what seemed like new eyes. Warmer somehow, more alive. It is more alive, I said, pouring coffee into 3 mugs. I've been entertaining more, having people over. Emma and Tyler visit regularly. I've made new friends, through the book club and the pottery classes. It turns out I quite like having company when it's people who actually want to be here. Jessica winced slightly at the implicit criticism, but she didn't argue with it. Mom, she said carefully, I know we have no right to ask this, but would you be willing to tell us about the scholarship fund? About how you decided to create it? What it's meant to you? For the next hour, I found myself sharing the story of the fund's creation, the students it had helped, the community it had built around supporting education. I told them about Maria's success in graduate school, about David's renewable energy innovations, about Angela's plans to use her engineering degree to improve water systems in underserved communities. Each of these students represents dozens of people who will benefit from their education, I explained. Maria will inspire future generations of museum visitors. David will help families reduce their environmental impact and save money on energy costs. Angela will bring clean water to communities that have never had it. The scholarship doesn't just change one life. It creates ripples that spread outward in ways we can't even predict. That's what Dad always said about education, Marcus said thoughtfully, that it was the one investment that paid dividends forever. Yes, I agreed, and that's why I knew he would approve of what I was doing, even if others didn't understand it at first. Jessica set down her coffee mug carefully. Mom, can I ask you something personal? I nodded, curious about what she might want to know. Are you happier now? Really happier, not just putting on a brave face? I considered the question seriously, thinking about the past year and all the changes it had brought. Yes, I said finally. I'm happier than I've been since before your father died. Maybe happier than I've been in decades. Because of the scholarship fund? Partly, I said, but mostly because I'm finally living my life according to my own values instead of other people's expectations. I'm making choices based on what brings me joy and fulfillment, rather than what seems practical or safe or convenient for others. Like the art classes, Marcus said. Tyler told me you've become quite accomplished at pottery. I laughed, thinking of the lopsided bowls and uneven vases that filled my kitchen shelves. I wouldn't say accomplished, but I love it. There's something deeply satisfying about creating something beautiful with your hands, about taking shapeless clay and turning it into something useful and pleasing. Could we see some of your work? Jessica asked, and there was genuine interest in her voice rather than polite obligation. I led them to the sunroom where I'd set up a small display case for my pottery pieces. They examined each piece carefully, asking questions about techniques and glazes, and the inspiration for different shapes and colors. Mom, these are really good, Jessica said with surprise. This bowl especially. The way the blue flows into the green, it's like looking at water. That was the idea, I said, pleased by her observation. I was thinking about the lake where your father and I used to go camping when you were children. I remember that lake, Marcus said softly. We went there every summer until I was about 12. You and Dad would sit by the water in the evenings while Jessica and I caught fireflies. You were so proud when you caught your first fish there, I said, remembering his excitement, the way Theodore had helped him hold the tiny sunfish while I took what felt like 100 photographs. Whatever happened to those photos? Marcus asked. They're all upstairs, I said, in albums that nobody ever looks at anymore. Could we look at them sometime? Jessica asked. I've been thinking lately about how few pictures I have of our family when we were young, how few memories I've preserved for my own children. That afternoon, we spread photo albums across my dining room table and spent hours revisiting a family history that felt both familiar and foreign. There we were at the lake, on camping trips during holiday celebrations, at school events and birthday parties. A family that had once been happy together, before adult responsibilities and financial pressures and unspoken resentments had created distance between us. Look at this one, Jessica said, pointing to a photo of herself at about age 10, covered in flour and grinning broadly. I remember that day. We were making cookies for Dad's birthday, and I insisted on helping even though I was too short to reach the counter properly. You dumped an entire cup of flour on the floor, I said, laughing at the memory. And then you slipped in it and sat down hard, sending flour clouds everywhere. But you didn't get mad, Jessica said wonderingly. You just laughed and helped me clean up and let me keep helping. Why would I get mad? You were trying to do something nice for your father. The mess was just part of the process. We found pictures of Marcus building elaborate Lego constructions on my living room floor, of family picnics where Theodore grilled hamburgers while the children played frisbee, of Christmas mornings when the wrapping paper covered every surface and everyone was laughing. We were happy then, Marcus said quietly. Really happy. What happened to us? Life happened, I said simply. You grew up, moved away, started your own families. That's natural and right. But somewhere along the way, we stopped making time for the relationships that had formed us. We stopped prioritizing connection over convenience. And we started taking you for granted, Jessica added, assuming you'd always be there, that you'd always put our needs first, that you'd never change or grow or want different things. I took myself for granted too, I admitted. I forgot that I was a person with my own dreams and desires, not just a mother and grandmother whose only purpose was serving others. As the afternoon wore on, something shifted between us. not a complete reconciliation. Too much damage had been done for that to happen quickly, but a recognition of who we had been to each other once, and who we might be able to become again. "Mom," Marcus said as they prepared to leave, "would you be willing to have dinner with us next week? All of us together, Jessica and me and our families. Not to talk about money or the past, but just to spend time together." "I'd like that," I said, and I meant it. Over the following months, we began the slow process of rebuilding relationships that had been damaged by years of misunderstanding and mutual resentment. It wasn't easy, and there were setbacks and awkward moments when old patterns reasserted themselves. But gradually we found our way to a new dynamic based on mutual respect rather than obligation. Jessica began calling regularly, not because she needed something, but because she genuinely wanted to know how I was doing. She asked about my pottery classes, my book club, my travel plans. She told me about her work, her struggles with balancing career and family, her hopes for her children's futures. Marcus started including me in family activities, inviting me to Tyler's college events, asking for my advice about parenting decisions, sharing his own dreams and concerns in ways he hadn't done since childhood. Most importantly, they both began to understand that my choices about my money and my life weren't rejections of them personally, but affirmations of my own autonomy and values. They saw the positive impact of the scholarship fund, the joy I found in my new activities, the energy that came from living according to my own priorities. "I'm proud of you, Mom," Jessica said during one of our phone conversations in late spring. "Not just because of the scholarship fund, although that's incredible, but because you stood up for yourself when it mattered. You refused to let us diminish you, even when it would have been easier to just go along with what we wanted." "It wasn't easy," I told her honestly. "Choosing myself over your approval was one of the hardest things I've ever done." "But it was right," she said firmly, "and it taught us something important about respect and boundaries and treating people we love as individuals rather than extensions of ourselves." The third annual scholarship dinner was held in May, and this time Jessica and Marcus attended as my guests. They met the students, heard their stories, saw firsthand the impact their mother's generosity was having on young lives and families throughout the community. Mrs. Reed, one of the new recipients, a young man named James, studying sustainable agriculture, approached our table during the reception. "I wanted to thank you for this opportunity, but also to tell you something my grandmother said when I told her about the scholarship." "What did she say?" I asked. "She said that the best gifts aren't just about money. They're about someone believing in your dreams enough to invest in them. She said that kind of faith changes how you see yourself, how you approach challenges, how you think about your responsibility to others." After he walked away, Marcus turned to me with tears in his eyes. "Mom, do you realize what you've done? You've created a legacy that will outlast all of us. These students will remember your faith in them for the rest of their lives, and they'll pass that forward to others." "That's what your father would have wanted," I said. "For our lives to mean something beyond ourselves." As we drove home that evening, Jessica in the passenger seat and Marcus following in his own car, I reflected on the journey that had brought us to this point. 2 years ago, I had been a lonely widow, shrinking myself to fit other people's expectations, preserving resources for inheritors who saw me as an inconvenience. Now I was surrounded by people who valued my company, living a life that reflected my own priorities, using my resources to create positive change in the world. The transformation hadn't been easy, and it had cost me relationships I'd once thought were essential. But it had also revealed relationships I hadn't known were possible, and aspects of myself I'd never had the courage to explore. "Mom," Jessica said as we pulled into my driveway, "I have something to tell you. Marcus and I have been talking, and we want you to know that we've both rewritten our own wills." "Have you?" I asked, curious about what that might mean. "We've established education funds for our children, but we've also designated portions of our estates for charitable giving. We want to follow your example of using our resources to make a difference rather than just accumulating wealth." "That's wonderful," I said, genuinely pleased by their decision. "And we want you to know that we're proud to be your children," Marcus added, getting out of his car to join us. "Not because of what you might leave us, but because of who you are and what you've taught us about living with purpose." As I prepared for bed that night, I thought about legacy and family and the different ways love expresses itself across generations. I thought about Theodore, who would have been proud of the scholarship fund and the young people it was helping. I thought about Emma and Tyler, who were building their own lives based on values of service and purpose. I thought about Jessica and Marcus, who were learning to see beyond their own immediate needs to consider their impact on others. But mostly, I thought about the woman I'd become since that morning 2 years ago, when my children told me they didn't need me anymore. They'd been right, in a way. They didn't need the diminished, apologetic version of myself I'd been offering them. They needed the strong, confident, purposeful woman I'd had to rediscover through trial and pain, and ultimately, through the courage to put my own happiness first. The scholarship fund would continue to grow and help students long after I was gone. My relationships with my family were stronger and more authentic than they'd been in years. My days were filled with activities that brought me joy and connections that nourished my spirit. I was 74 years old, and I was finally living the life I'd always been meant to live. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.